Hello, beautiful humans. My name is Annie, and this is Holy Hell Hope, a haven for those of us struggling to make meaning in a world that sometimes seems to be going to shit. And I asked a few of my friends for some ideas of spiritual issues, emotional issues, existential issues that they might like me to take a crack at. And my very first request came from one of my very finest friends, who I know from seminary and who is a full-time pastor. And this friend asked about the intersection of tarot and Christianity because they might be interested in getting into tarot. I know that many people raised in a Christian context are taught that tarot is untrustworthy and can be a conduit for spiritually unhealthy forces. Understood. And that is an argument for another day, and one that I am sensitive to. But I also want to be especially thoughtful about doing justice to this subject, not only because I know what it means to my friend, but because I went to seminary. I am an ordained elder of a Christian denomination established in 1861. And Christian faith is something that I struggle with, and something which many Christians struggle with every day. And when we struggle in our sense of being connected to something that we can trust, that is stable, that is reliable, something that is going to make sense of the world, tarot is a tool for doing that because it is a divination tool. And divination is about communicating with invisible beings, I suppose, might be a generalized way of framing it. And because of how broad that term is, I respect that many people feel that precautions need to be taken when we are engaging with a spiritual information, spiritually informative people or beings, what have you. I'm going to try to just kind of get to the point here because there really is a lot of intersection between tarot and Christianity in terms of the traditional imagery. But quite frankly, if you want tarot or oracle cards to be a part of your spiritual practice, then that's something that you are negotiating with your own soul. You have to decide the meaning of these cards as a tool, or the meaning of any tool in your spiritual path. These are tools for you to use. They are not magic. Cards are not magic. They are cardboard. But magic can be done with them. And I think that one of the most powerful magics that we can do is feeling anchored in our faith, whatever that looks like. And this is why I have lifted up the Master Jesus card, which is from the Keepers of the Light Oracle deck, created by Kyle Gray and illustrated by Lily Moses. This happened to be the keeper for me for this month, which is, in fact, an understandable challenge. I think that if the spirits are wanting to put something in my face, Jesus is a good candidate. As you can see here, Master Jesus is described as representing forgiveness, and the text reads, "You are on the path of light, love, and happiness. Father healing is possible at this time." And that's really the crux of it, father healing for many of us. I'm going to be digging into some theological quandaries in other videos. But for those of us who turn to tarot in order to feel like we're hearing something back because we feel a disconnection from the divine. Father healing can be a component of it. The figure of Jesus can be an aspect or an obstacle in it. So I want to be comprehensive and thoughtful as I tackle this subject. So with Master Jesus simply being the signifier of this conversation, I'm going to put him up here. Hey, bud. And I want to go into the imagery of the traditional tarot. And by traditional, I mean the Rider-Smith Waite tarot deck. This is the classic form of tarot depicted by Pamela Coleman Smith, who is a significant female figure in, I suppose, the esoteric category. And this is the imagery that you're going to think of first if you think of tarot. And I think that it's therefore pretty important to zero in on the ways that these creators of this art and this spiritual tool chose to integrate explicitly imagery from Old and New Testament, primarily in the major arcana. I think that there are elements throughout the cards that you could argue, but this is where it is most explicit. There are 22 cards in the major arcana, and the majors represent the forces that may be working upon us, inasmuch as they are transcendent of us, separate to us. They are active in the reality that we are experiencing, and they are forces that we respond to. Whereas the minor arcana represents the earthly material aspects of our life and things that we can more directly control. So I want to go through really quickly these particular cards. The majority of the majors have explicit imagery or references to the Old and New Testament. I'm going to kind of breeze through here. The magician represents the fully empowered human being. As you can see, he has in front of him each of the four elements, meaning that he is equipped to handle any challenge. Those who might describe themselves as Christo-pagan, which is a category that I probably fall in, might suggest that this card is reflective of Master Jesus, inasmuch as it inspires us to towards the fulfillment of our potential as agents in our own lives. So the magician, specifically the biblical reference here is his gestures to the sky and to the earth, references the concept of as above, so below. And this is the first card of the major arcana, or rather, I guess the second. The Fool is 0. This is the first figure that the Fool encounters on his journey, and this is the figure who tells him what he is capable of. And so I find it very meaningful to correlate this to Jesus in a positive way. So as above, so below. The High Priestess imagery, as you can see here in her hands, there is the Torah, but also specifically the B and the J on the two columns to either side of her, which represent discernment of duality, good and evil, the fact that the High Priestess speaks to times when it is difficult to discern. The B and J refer to Boaz and Yakin, or Jachin, referenced in Jeremiah and 1 Kings as columns made of some precious metal, such as bronze or copper, which were on the porch of Solomon's temple and which were destroyed when the first temple was torn down. So again, this is a reference, a dual reference to the Old Testament. Now, the Empress and the Emperor, I would acknowledge, don't have a ton of specifically Christian imagery in them, but I wanted to bring them up because they are meant to represent both halves of the divine. So the feminine, by which we mean the receptive, the quiet, the mysterious, the emotive, the responsive aspects of of the divine, as well as the aspects that are more oriented towards law and order, structure for a society, specifically patriarchal power. The patriarchy is represented here not just by the extra references to the rams, but also I think the wheat and or mountains behind him. I don't know the specifics, but as you can see, he's got quite a dominion. So I bring these up simply as an acknowledgement that Yahweh, the male God who is the only God in the Jewish and Christian contexts, does have aspects lacking in what Yahweh represents, aspects lacking in terms of not covering all the bases with this, the empress, the expressive, the creative, the benevolent, the merciful, the graceful. Well, gosh, that's an argument in and of itself. You could argue, I think, that the Empress is reflected in the Jesus figure, certainly in the Shekinah, which is the Hebrew term for the Holy Spirit, which is a feminine word. These could all be videos in themselves, but I kind of want to keep cruising here. The Hierophant specifically represents the Pope, represents the man in terms of all highly structured institutions, so the government or the church, and as you can see, the acolytes are prostrating themselves to him. He has the keys to whichever gate you might be looking at, material or metaphysical. The lover's imagery reflects the Bible, obviously in terms of a winged angel, but we have here Eve with the apple tree and the snake, and Adam with what would probably be a reference to the burning bush that Moses encountered. So again, with specific Christian imagery. Divine Strength, number 8, is a card that means a great deal to me. For myself, I connect it to archangels, which are a category of being that I try to connect to. This is divine strength in as much as the lion represents our more animal selves, and this human, more enlightened figure with the infinity symbol above her head, she is more mindful of the long-term big picture aspects of a situation, and so soothes the animal nature, is able to tame the animal using divine strength. The Hermit is a highly spiritual character, and I consider this to be reflective of, I suppose, Christian mysticism in particular. This would be meditation, isolation, prayer and fasting, any intentional discipline that you undertake for the purpose of spiritual introspection is represented by the Hermit, and those are certainly practices valued in the Christian worldview. The Wheel of Fortune. Okay, then let's jump also to the world, because I wanted to lift these up as in terms of cards that, as I prepared for this video, I learned some pretty cool things. You'll notice that both round figures in the center are surrounded by 4 figures in the corner. You have in both cards, in varying levels of detail, head or body, you have a man, an eagle, a lion, and an ox. This is referred to as the tetramorph. This four-part entity, which is often depicted as a single body with 4 heads, represents the 4 elements as well as the 4 evangelists. And as you can see, they are in the order as referenced in the book of Ezekiel, chapter 1. You have Mark as the lion, representing courage, monarchy, and fire. Luke as the ox, representing service, strength, and I would say the element of earth. John as the eagle represents a higher Christology, in that is the Gnostic gospel, whereas the others were synoptic, in case you're religion nerds. But the eagle obviously represents the air. And that leaves Matthew as the man, which represents incarnation and human nature, but also our capacity for reason, rising above our emotional responses. in terms of process of elimination, I suppose he would be the element of water. But of course, I want to acknowledge that Christians were not trying to do the explicit acknowledgement of the four elements. They were trying to go in a different direction with their ideology. So when I throw in fire, earth, air, etc. in the end there, that is a reference to the way that Christo-pagans or individual spiritual practitioners who are working with Christian iconography have chosen to connect to them or integrate them into a more syncretic faith. And we'll come back to that idea. But to continue to just kind of cruise through some of these references, you have here the death who is the death card. He has walked over the king. He is bearing down on civilians, but also here a pope. The significance of including the king and the pope here is an acknowledgement that death comes to all human beings. That there is no height of earthly power that will make a difference specifically in your spiritual transformation or transcendence. So at the very least, that's an inclusion of a reference to the church, echoing the fact that these cards were responding to the fact that the church was a big part of the cultures, the communities in play. These are images that made sense to them, strongly, symbolically resonant, etc. The devil, and really the primary reason that people don't trust the tarot. This card and death and the tower, when they pop, people freak out, and I understand it, absolutely. For the purposes of this video, I'm simply acknowledging that, again, you have Adam and Eve chosen or depicted here in direct corollary to the way they are depicted in the Lovers. Sorry, I'm having such a hard time staying centered in my Zoom here. Temperance is an angel, but also specifically is an angel of moderation, patience, reconciliation, the matter of trying to blend things together, bring people together. I mean, Jesus the Christ, they're two separate things. For most people, they're one. I get it. Let's move on. Christ really was about reconciliation. And in that sense, the temperance card reflects that. And of course, in terms of being winged creatures, there's Christian iconography of angels. The star, for myself, I would say that this is the closest to the depiction of heaven. It is the celestial body farthest away from earth. It is also the most protected from the ills of the world. This is a safe haven card. This is where you can be fully vulnerable. You can be naked as the day you were born. So in that sense, this is a heavenly kind of imagery to my mind. Judgment Day. It really speaks for itself. You have grayed bodies, so a reference to the strong possibility that these are dead people, especially since, they're climbing out of coffins. But many Christians do believe in the bodily resurrection. And again, winged angel with the triumphant horns from the heavens, very traditional, Book of Revelation. Incidentally, if you're going to be my friend or a fan of my work, please bear in mind, it's the Book of Revelation, not Revelations. One dude, one revelation, one story. It's just a pet peeve. I'm sorry for freaking out, but I really want to make sure that folks are aware that it's the Book of Revelation. And finally, again, the card of the world, which represents, of course, the big picture, the whole enchilada, the completion, etc. So as I put these back into my deck at random and shuffle up, because I do want to do a brief reading on advice for folks who are incorporating tarot into their Christian practices. I had a conversation recently with my grandfather's wife, and she is a practicing Mormon, and he converted and met her all in tandem. And I was very pleasantly surprised, when she said, "Oh, sure, some of my friends play with tarot." And I asked, is that an aspect of their faith? And she said, well, no, it's not really relevant. Like that's not how they see it. To which I responded, well, all right then. We might be talking about slightly different things. Yes and no. I think that it is important to have a playful approach in as much as not to take the cards too seriously, because then you might run the risk of ever thinking that they are predictive, that anything that they show you is locked in, which is never gonna be the case. So it's definitely appropriate to take a lighthearted approach to the cards. And quite frankly, if that's your approach, then that's the relationship you're going to build with the deck. That's the emotional energy that you're going to imbue into the deck. I mean, that's how your relationship to it's going to play out. And that ain't a bad thing. But that said, it can be, tarot can be used more intentionally. I don't tend to use it for predictive purposes. I don't tend to ask, will this happen? Am I, etc. My preference is to use tarot for the purpose of self-care. As it's a therapeutic tool. And to my mind, what that means is that the tarot entirely means what I said, whatever I say it means. Page of Pentacles. All right, well, if you're going to pop out, let's see what you got to say. The Page of Pentacles is a new start for a human being. It's a person who picks up a coin, picks up a seed, moves forward with a new endeavor, specifically in terms of a new chance for stability, anchoring in the material world, perhaps, what might be otherwise abstract spiritual ideas for you. So that's how I'm going to decide that card means right now. As I was saying, it is entirely up to you. You can take precautions in terms of ensuring that you connect to spiritual folks that you want to connect to. Precautions can include particular prayers, either used by others or ones that you write for yourself. Particular crystals that either are traditionally associated with or are for you representative of protection and security. You can, quite frankly, I talk to the air. I mean, I'm not going to lie. I'll use incense. I'll use my selenite wand. I've got, my little guardian buddies, and I've got what I call my homemade holy water. But all that being said, when I sit down at the cards, I just talk to the air. For myself, I refer to the others, the capital O, other, the ultimate. I approach them with the phrase holy ones and spirit folk. I enjoy playing around with words, and pluralizing or singularizing in a way that's clunky is fun because it's accurate. Whatevs. Holy ones, acknowledging that there are separate symbols and figures that we are responding to, moving towards. And spirit folk, to emphasize that there is a family or communal connection here. There is a connectivity throughout all. So what am I doing with these particular cards at this particular time? Looking for 4 quick cards, 1 on top, 3 on the bottom. Advice for those striving to incorporate tarot card reading or another divination tool into their specifically Christian faith. What you got? 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 What do you like? I think you're hiding. You look fun. All right. Yup. Interesting. Well, okay then. What? Oi. This is not where I thought you were going to go with this. At least we got the star on the bottom. All right. We got a little bit of heaven over here. Oh, Master Jesus, be with me here. Advice for those incorporating tarot into your Christian faith. Acknowledgement, your church probably won't like it much. My church is non-creedal. They're pretty cool with anything that is for the good. And again, that comes down to intentionality. It, it, I'm just gonna flow here. If you're looking at tarot cards, there is something that you feel is lacking in your relationship with structure in general, the church in particular, whatever that might be. There's something lacking. The power dynamic is skewed. You feel like there's too much distance between the one who is above and maybe silent to those below. In terms of the Death card and the Tower, gosh, ultimately, we turn to tarot or any source of spiritual counseling when we are troubled. We are unlikely to seek out help when we are fine. We seek out the input of the sacred in times of transition, of loss, of ending, times of chaos, of transformation, of devastation. And the Knight of Swords is the fastest way for the spirit to respond. One of the fastest ways. When you know what the cards mean, when you know how to read them, when you have a relationship with them, there is an immediacy to the fact that you're shuffling now, you're laying the cards now. The reason I emphasize speed is that the Knight of Swords, all of the knights are the active agents of the suit. The swords is the fastest moving. You can tell this is the knight in shining armor sweeping in, sword shining in the sun, ready to tackle the problem. Air is communication, is intellect, is words. So when it comes down to it, if you are struggling with your relationship with the systems that may oppress you or may trouble you or fail to meet you where you are, when you are troubled by chaos, distress, loss, grief, the cards will speak now. And that can bring a sense of connection that is a profound relief for those of us who are longing to hear the voice of God. Thank you for bearing with me for this whole conversation. As you can tell, my relationship with my faith is a tricky one, and one that I'll delve into because I know that this is the kind of relationship that's tricky for a lot of us. And the moral of this story is tarot can be a way to have that conversation with the universe, with God, with the divine, with the eternal, etc. So thank you very much for your time, for exploring this subject with me. Please do like, subscribe. Please comment, especially if you have any kind of interest in subject matter related to tarot, to Christianity, to faith, spirituality, distress, being angry at the man. I'm going to have some rants. If you want to stick around and hear what I have to say, do the thing. Do the like, the subscribe, the little bell with the notifications. And also, thank you very much for holding this sacred time with me. I pray many blessings for you and yours. God bless.